I called an air conditioning repair guy while my adoptive son was out. 15 minutes later, I received a message from the attic that sent chills down my spine. The technician wrote, "Sir, there is a hidden door behind the shelves. I hear breathing inside." I casually told him it was just storage. But then his reply came. "There are 6 heavy-duty locks on the door, a carbon monoxide detector, and someone is trapped in there." That was the moment I realized the monster I had raised was hiding his darkest secret right above my head. If you are watching this, take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is something I never imagined would happen under my own roof. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I need your support to get through this because the truth I uncovered will leave your jaw on the floor. It is 114 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona. This is not just a hot summer day. It is a record-breaking heat wave that makes the air feel like you are standing directly behind a jet engine. My name is Richard Bowman, but my friends call me Rick. I am 70 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 40 years of his life calculating load bearings, structural integrity, and stress fractures. I built this classic sprawling ranch house with my own 2 hands. It was supposed to be my peaceful sanctuary for my twilight years, but right now it feels like a brick oven. The central air conditioning just died. There is dead silence coming from the air vents. Sweating through my cotton shirt, I reached for my cell phone on the granite kitchen counter. I needed to call an emergency repair service before the house baked me alive. But before my fingers could even dial the second digit, a hand violently yanked the phone right out of my grip. It was Tyler. Tyler is my 34-year-old adoptive son. I took him in when he was just 10 years old, gave him everything, and paid for his education. On paper, he is a highly successful real estate and cryptocurrency investor. He is a man who wears custom-tailored suits and always pretends to care about my safety whenever we are in public. But behind closed doors, he is a ruthless control freak. "Dad, what do you think you're doing?" Tyler barked at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "The AC is broken, Tyler. It is boiling in here. I am calling a repairman." Tyler slammed my cell phone down onto the counter. "No, you are not calling anyone. You are not bringing any strangers into this house today. I will fix it myself after I get back from my meeting." I stared at him, absolutely bewildered. "Fix it yourself? You do not know the first thing about HVAC systems." "Tyler, look at me. I am 70 years old. I cannot sit in a house that is 114 degrees. It is dangerous." But Tyler was already pacing across the hardwood floor, his voice rising in a strange mixture of panic and aggressive anger. I said, "No, Dad. My highly classified crypto mining servers are running upstairs in the attic right now. There are millions of dollars in digital assets processing as we speak. I cannot have some random minimum wage worker poking around the vents and messing with the electrical grid. Do you understand me?" He did not even wait for my answer. He grabbed his leather briefcase and headed straight for the heavy wooden front door. "Tyler!" I yelled, feeling a sudden wave of dizziness wash over me as the ambient temperature in the house steadily climbed. "You cannot leave me locked in here without air conditioning." Tyler turned back, giving me a cold, patronizing smile that made my blood boil. "Just drink some tap water, old man. I will be back in 3 hours. Do not touch the doors." With that, he walked out. A second later, I heard the heavy mechanical hum of the smart locks engaging. Click, click, click. Tyler had installed a state-of-the-art automated security system last year. He claimed it was to protect my valuables. In reality, it was a leash. He locked the main deadbolts from the outside using his smartphone application. I was trapped inside my own home. The heat in the living room was quickly becoming unbearable. The heavy Arizona sun beat down relentlessly on the roof, turning the house into a literal pressure cooker. I stumbled into the kitchen and splashed lukewarm water on my face. My heart was pounding far too fast in my chest. The early symptoms of heat stroke were already creeping into my bones. My vision blurred slightly at the edges. I knew I needed to get help immediately, but Tyler had taken my cell phone with him. Then my civil engineer brain kicked into gear. I remembered a tiny detail that Tyler had completely forgotten. In the back of the guest bedroom closet, buried under a pile of old architectural blueprints, there was an ancient analog landline phone. It was plugged straight into the wall, jack completely disconnected from Tyler and his fancy smart home grid. I dragged myself down the long hallway, every single step, feeling heavier than the last. I dug through the dusty closet, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I pulled out the old beige receiver. I held my breath. There was a dial tone. I quickly dialed an emergency HVAC repair company that I had used a decade ago. A friendly dispatcher answered, and after hearing the panic in my voice, they promised to send a technician named Jason right away. I sat on the closet floor, leaning against the doorframe, gasping for air. I felt a small, bitter victory. I was not going to let my arrogant son dictate whether I lived or died in a boiling house. 20 minutes later, I heard a sharp knock at the back patio door. It was Jason. He was a sharp, 20-year-old kid, dressed in a gray uniform. Because the smart locks were jammed, I had to communicate with him through the thick glass window. I explained that I was locked in by a malfunctioning smart lock and asked if he could pick the old manual deadbolt on the side door. Jason smiled confidently, mentioning he was a former army mechanic. True to his word, within seconds, he had the heavy door open. A rush of dry, scorching air blasted into the hallway, but Jason did not waste any time. He took one look at my pale face, told me to sit down and drink plenty of water, and immediately grabbed his heavy tool bag. "The main air handler is up in the attic, right?" he asked. I nodded weakly from the kitchen chair. "Please be careful up there," I warned him. "My son claims he has a bunch of expensive computer servers running." Jason chuckled lightly. "Do not worry, sir. I will just check the cooling coils and the blower motor. I will be in and out." Jason pulled down the wooden attic stairs and climbed up, disappearing into the dark, stifling space above the ceiling. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of water, finally feeling my racing heart rate begin to slow down. I honestly thought the worst of the drama was over. I thought this was just a simple disagreement with an overbearing, greedy son. But 15 minutes passed. No sound came from the attic. No clanking of metal tools. No footsteps on the wooden joists. Just a heavy, suffocating silence. Then the landline phone on the counter suddenly rang, shattering the quiet. It was the HVAC company dispatcher. She said Jason had just sent an urgent text message to their dispatch system, and she needed to read it to me immediately. She cleared her throat and read the exact words of Jason. "Sir, there is a hidden door behind the attic shelves. I hear breathing inside." The line went completely dead for a second, as my brain struggled to process what the dispatcher had just said. I gripped the beige plastic receiver of the landline so hard, my knuckles turned white. Breathing. Someone is breathing in my attic. The words echoed in my mind, fighting against every logical thought I possessed. I told the dispatcher to wait, my voice trembling. I needed to see this for myself. Tyler had taken my cellular phone, but I suddenly remembered my tablet was still sitting on the living room coffee table, connected to the home wireless network. I asked the dispatcher for Jason's direct cell phone number, scribbled it down on a piece of junk mail, and hung up the landline. My legs felt like lead as I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the tablet. The house was still an absolute furnace, the stagnant hot air pressing against my skin like a heavy wool blanket. Sweat stung my eyes, but the chill running down my spine made me shiver. I opened the messaging application on the tablet and typed in the number the dispatcher had given me. "Jason, this is Rick, the homeowner." I typed, my fingers slipping slightly on the glass screen. "The dispatcher just relayed your message to me. Are you absolutely sure about what you are hearing? There is no hidden door up there. It is just a reinforced storage unit where my son keeps his expensive computer servers. The sound you are hearing is probably just the liquid cooling pumps circulating water, or maybe a raccoon found its way into the ventilation shaft. I hit send and stared at the screen praying for a logical explanation. I was a civil engineer. I built things based on logic mathematics and solid foundations. The idea of a secret room in my own home, a house I had designed from the ground up, was completely absurd. I had drawn the blueprints myself 30 years ago. There was only raw insulation, wooden joists, and the main air handler up in that dark space. A minute passed. The agonizing silence of the baking house was deafening. Then a small gray bubble appeared on the tablet screen. Jason was typing. "Sir, with all due respect, I know what a water pump sounds like," Jason replied. "I worked on diesel engines and heavy machinery in the Army for 3 years. Pumps have a rhythmic mechanical hum. This is not mechanical. It is shallow. It is uneven. It is a human breath. And Sir, raccoons do not install biometric security systems." I furrowed my brow, wiping another layer of sweat from my face. Before I could even type a response, the tablet buzzed loudly in my hands. Jason had sent an image attachment. I tapped on the picture to enlarge it, and my breath caught in my throat. The photograph was dark and grainy, illuminated only by the harsh white glare of Jason's flashlight, but the details were unmistakable. Behind a false wall of old cardboard boxes and fiberglass insulation, there was a heavy industrial-grade steel door. But that was not what made my stomach drop into my shoes. It was the hardware. As an engineer, I immediately recognized the specifications. Along the reinforced steel frame, there were 6 heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts. They were solid brass high-security locks, the kind you would normally see on a bank vault or a pharmaceutical storage room. And every single one of those locks was installed on the outside of the door. Whoever or whatever was inside that room could not get out. It was not a vault designed to keep thieves out. It was a prison cell designed to keep someone locked inside. My eyes scanned the rest of the photograph. Mounted on the drywall just above the heavy steel door was a small white plastic device with a blinking green light. It was a digital carbon monoxide detector. You only install a carbon monoxide monitor in a sealed, unventilated space if there is a living, breathing organism inside that you need to keep alive. Server racks do not need to worry about carbon monoxide poisoning. I felt a wave of severe nausea wash over me. The suffocating heat of the house suddenly felt entirely different. It felt like a trap. "Are you still there?" Jason texted, a sense of urgency clear even through the short message. "I am standing right next to the hinges. There is a small gap near the bottom seal." "I swear to you, sir, someone is in there. What do you want me to do? Should I try to pry it open with my crowbar?" "No." I typed back frantically, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Do not touch those locks. If my son installed a system that advanced, there are probably tamper alarms wired directly to his phone. If you try to break the hinges, he will know instantly." I stared at the screen, my mind racing through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. Tyler had been so aggressive this morning. He had locked me inside a boiling house just to keep a repairman away from the attic. He lied about the servers. He lied about the security. The boy I had raised had constructed a literal dungeon right above the living room. A cold sweat broke out across my back. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time. I put the tablet down on the cold granite counter and slowly walked toward the main hallway. The ceiling above this corridor was directly beneath the area Jason was investigating. I stood perfectly still, closing my eyes, and forced myself to listen past the ringing in my ears. At first, there was nothing. Just the creaking of the wooden frame expanding in the intense summer heat. But then, as I held my breath, I heard it. A faint, muffled thump. We needed the police right now. My fingers flew across the glass of the tablet as fast as my shaking hands would allow. Jason listened to me very carefully, I typed. Do not try to open that door. Do not make a sound. I want you to crawl behind the thick rolls of pink fiberglass insulation near the air handler and hide. I am calling the police right now. Whatever you do, do not let anyone know you are up there until the officers secure the attic. The reply came almost instantly. Understood. I am hiding. Please hurry, sir. It is like an oven up here. I set the tablet down on the kitchen island. My breathing was ragged, pulling in the thick, stifling air of the baking house. The heat no longer mattered. A cold, sharp clarity had taken over my mind. For 30 years, this house had been a place of safety. Now it was a crime scene. I turned away from the kitchen and moved down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Every step felt deliberate, heavy with the weight of what I was about to do. I walked into the walk-in closet, pushing aside the neatly hanging suits and coats, and knelt down in the far corner. Hidden beneath a false floorboard was a small, heavy steel lockbox. My hands trembled as I spun the mechanical combination dial. 4, 17, 32. The lock clicked open with a heavy metallic thud. Inside, resting on a piece of worn velvet, was my old .38 caliber revolver. I had purchased it decades ago, right after a string of burglaries in the neighborhood, but I had never actually needed to load it. Until today. I reached in and grabbed the cold steel grip. It felt heavy and alien in my hand. I pulled out a small cardboard box of ammunition, carefully sliding 6 brass cartridges into the cylinder. I snapped the cylinder shut with a sharp click. I was not planning to shoot my adoptive son, but I had no idea what he was capable of anymore. A man who could build a hidden prison cell in his own home was a man capable of anything. I slipped the heavy revolver into the waistband of my trousers, making sure my loose shirt covered the grip. I walked back to the guest bedroom closet and picked up the beige receiver of the analog landline phone. The plastic felt slippery with my sweat. I pressed the numbers 911. The dial tone vanished, replaced by a brief silence before a calm, professional voice came on the line. 911, what is your emergency? I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady and authoritative. I could not sound like a confused old man. I needed them to take me seriously. My name is Richard Bowman, I said. I am reporting a potential hostage situation at my residence. I am currently locked inside my own home by my adoptive son, Tyler Bowman. He has remotely disabled the electronic doors. I have a heating and air conditioning technician trapped in the attic, and he has just discovered a reinforced steel door with external deadbolts. We believe there is someone locked inside that hidden room. The dispatcher paused for a fraction of a second, processing the bizarre and terrifying information. Sir, are you saying someone is being held against their will inside a secret room in your house? Yes, I replied firmly. The technician heard breathing coming from behind the door. There is a carbon monoxide detector mounted outside the frame. My son claimed it was a server room, but the hardware indicates it is a cell. He is highly aggressive and currently away from the property, but he could return at any moment. Please send officers immediately. The ambient temperature in the house is over 100 degrees, and whoever is locked in that room might be suffocating. Units are being dispatched to your location right now, Mr. Bowman, the dispatcher said, her voice dropping into a serious, urgent register. I need you to stay on the line with me. Do you have access to any weapons? I have a .38 caliber revolver, I answered honestly. It is loaded, but I am keeping it holstered. I just want the police here to secure the area. Understood, she replied. Do not confront your son if he returns. Let the officers handle it. I can hear the sirens approaching your sector now. I stood in the sweltering hallway, the landline receiver pressed tightly against my ear. Through the thick, insulated walls of my house, I could hear the faint, distant wail of police sirens. They were coming down the main highway, cutting through the heavy afternoon heat. Relief washed over me for a fleeting moment. The authorities were coming. They would break down the doors, pry open that steel vault in the attic, and end this waking nightmare. But that brief moment of relief was violently shattered. Without warning, a deafening, piercing alarm erupted from the smart home speakers mounted in every room of the house. The sound was a high-pitched, rhythmic shrieking that rattled my teeth and made my heart skip a beat. Red emergency lights began flashing from the motion sensors on the ceiling. Tyler had set up a perimeter alert on his phone application. He had programmed the system to notify him immediately if emergency sirens approached the property line. He knew the police were coming. Through the front bay window, I saw the blinding reflection of sunlight on metal. A black luxury sedan came tearing down the street at a terrifying speed. It was Tyler. The car screeched loudly, burning thick black rubber against the scorching driveway pavement. Simultaneously, 2 white police cruisers swerved onto the lawn, their bright lights flashing. 4 officers jumped out. I watched in absolute shock as they drew their weapons, pointing the dark barrels directly at Tyler as he stepped out of his vehicle. "Show me your hands." One of the officers shouted, his voice cutting through the wail of the sirens. Tyler did not panic. He did not raise his hands in terror like a normal person would. Instead, he slowly closed his car door, let out a long, exaggerated sigh, and raised his hands just to shoulder level, displaying an expression of deep, weary annoyance. "Officers, what is the meaning of this?" Tyler asked, his voice smooth and remarkably calm. "I am the homeowner. I received an automated alert that my security perimeter was breached." The lead officer, a tall man with a stern face, kept his weapon drawn and approached Tyler cautiously. "We received an emergency call from inside the residence. A report of a potential hostage situation. Keep your hands where I can see them. We need to clear the property." Tyler let out a short, hollow laugh that sent a fresh wave of dread through my veins. A hostage situation. Let me guess. It was my father Richard who called. I watched from the front window as Tyler shook his head, playing the role of the exhausted, dutiful son to absolute perfection. "Yes, officer. My father called you. He is inside. Please put the guns away. You are scaring the neighbors, and you are going to give an old man a heart attack." The officers lowered their weapons slightly, but remained on high alert. 2 of them escorted Tyler to the front porch, while the other 2 approached the door. I reached out and manually unlatched the deadbolt from the inside, swinging the heavy wooden door open. The blistering heat of the afternoon rushed in, mingling with the suffocating warmth of the house. The lead officer stepped inside, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered firearm. "Mr. Bowman?" he asked, looking at me. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yes. I am Richard. My technician is upstairs in the attic. There is a locked room. Someone is inside." Before the officer could respond, Tyler walked through the front door, flanked by the other 2 policemen. He looked around the sweltering living room and sighed again, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Dad, what did you do this time?" Tyler asked, his voice dripping with condescension and fake sympathy. "I told you I was coming right back to fix the air conditioning. Why would you call the police and tell them someone is being held hostage?" My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Because your repairman found a steel vault above my living room, Tyler." He heard breathing. "What are you hiding up there?" Tyler did not argue. He did not get defensive. Instead, he turned to the lead officer with a look of complete transparency. "Officer, I run a highly lucrative cryptocurrency mining operation. The servers are located in a secure, climate-controlled room in the attic to keep them isolated from the rest of the house. The door is locked because the hardware inside is worth over $2 million. There is no hostage. If you want to see it, I will gladly show you right now." The lead officer nodded sharply. "Lead the way. Show us the room." We all moved toward the hallway. I followed closely behind the officers, my pulse pounding in my ears. I knew what Jason had texted me. I knew what those locks meant. Tyler pulled down the wooden attic stairs and gestured for the officers to go first. The lead cop climbed up, his flashlight cutting through the dark, dusty air of the attic space. I climbed up right behind him, the heat up here feeling absolutely lethal, easily pushing 130 degrees. Jason, the young technician, emerged slowly from behind a thick roll of pink fiberglass insulation, his face pale and dripping with sweat. He pointed silently toward the back of the attic. Tyler stepped up onto the wooden floorboards, completely unfazed by the oppressive heat or the police presence. He walked straight over to the false wall made of old cardboard boxes and casually pushed them aside. Behind the boxes was the heavy steel door Jason had photographed. The officers tensed, illuminating the door with their heavy flashlights. I saw the 6 commercial-grade deadbolts shining dull gold in the beam. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of brass keys. He inserted the first key, turned it with a heavy click, and then proceeded to unlock the remaining 5 deadbolts one by one. I held my breath, my hand instinctively dropping to the heavy revolver hidden under my shirt. I prepared myself for whatever nightmare was about to be exposed. With a final click, Tyler pulled the heavy steel door open. A blast of freezing cold air rushed out into the stifling attic, followed immediately by a deafening rhythmic mechanical hum. The officers stepped forward, shining their lights inside. I peered over their shoulders, my stomach tying into knots. There was no hostage. There was no padded cell. All I saw was a narrow, meticulously organized room, lined with massive racks of glowing computer equipment. Brilliant blue and green diode indicators flashed rapidly in the dark. Thick, transparent tubes filled with liquid snaked through the servers. The rhythmic, uneven sound Jason described as breathing was overwhelmingly loud. It was the synchronized suction of heavy liquid cooling pumps. Tyler turned to the lead officer, raising his voice to be heard over the noise. "As you can see, officers, this is my mining rig. The locks are not to keep someone inside. They are to keep thieves outside. That carbon monoxide detector is an environmental sensor hooked up to my phone to monitor coolant gas." The lead officer lowered his flashlight, clearly satisfied and annoyed by the false alarm. Tyler gave Jason a cold glare before turning back. His expression softened into tragic sorrow as he looked at me with fake pity. "My poor dad has dementia. He hallucinates." The silence that followed his words was heavier than the blistering heat of the attic. I stood frozen, my eyes darting from Tyler to the lead officer. Hallucinates. He had just erased my credibility with a single perfectly delivered lie. The tense, coiled energy of the police officers instantly evaporated. I watched as shoulders relaxed, hands moved away from holstered weapons, and heavy flashlights were casually lowered toward the dusty floorboards. The lead officer let out a long, frustrated exhale, shaking his head. He looked at me not with suspicion, but with a mixture of pity and deep annoyance. "No," I protested, my voice cracking slightly under the strain of the stifling air. "You are not looking closely enough. Look at the dimensions of this space. Look at the depth. There is another door behind those racks." I stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger toward the back of the narrow server room. Beyond the flashing lights and the thick, winding tubes of coolant, there was a secondary partition, a solid reinforced panel that looked entirely out of place for a simple computer rig. I turned back to the officers. "You have to open that inner door. That is where the sound is coming from." Tyler let out a dramatic, weary sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose as if dealing with an unruly toddler. "Dad, please stop this. You are embarrassing yourself." He turned his attention back to the police. "Officers, that back partition is a hermetically sealed clean room. I repair sensitive motherboards and delicate microchips in there. It is a dust-sealed environment. If you force that door open right now, the sudden influx of unfiltered attic dust and extreme heat will instantly destroy over $400,000 worth of exposed hardware. I cannot allow you to breach that room without a court order, and frankly, you have zero probable cause to do so." The lead officer held up his hands in a placating gesture, completely buying into Tyler's flawless corporate excuse. "We are not going to force entry into a sealed clean room, Mr. Bowman. We have seen enough here. There is no hostage. There is no emergency." He turned his stern gaze directly onto me, stepping closer so his towering frame cast a shadow over my face. "Sir, do you realize what you did today? You called in a high-priority hostage situation. We pulled 4 units off patrol. We were seconds away from calling in a tactical response team. Making a false report of this magnitude is a serious criminal offense." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I am not making a false report," I insisted, my voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I am an engineer. I know what a secure facility looks like. This is not right. Please, you have to listen to me." But the officers were already turning away. The second policeman spoke up, his tone flat and uncompromising. "Listen to your son, sir. You need to stay out of the heat and get some rest. We are going to let this go with a warning because of your age. But if we have to come out to this residence again for a phantom emergency, you will be facing severe fines and potential psychiatric evaluation. Do you understand me?" I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. The threat was crystal clear. If I pushed any harder, Tyler would have the perfect excuse to declare me legally incompetent. He would have the police on record stating I was a danger to myself. I nodded my head, forced to accept the agonizing defeat. "I understand," I muttered, dropping my gaze to the wooden floorboards. Tyler was not finished. With the police firmly on his side, he turned his wrath toward the young technician who had started this entire ordeal. He marched over to Jason, who was still standing awkwardly near the insulation rolls, clutching his heavy canvas tool bag. "You," Tyler barked, his voice sharp and vicious. "What kind of professional operation are you running? My father is clearly suffering from cognitive decline. And instead of calling me the homeowner, you indulge his paranoid delusions and help him call a SWAT team to my house." Jason stood his ground, his jaw tightening. "Sir, I heard what I heard. I was just following standard safety protocols." Tyler stepped into Jason's personal space, his eyes flashing with genuine malice. "You are trespassing in a secure corporate area. You are fired. You are not getting paid a single dime for this service call, and if I ever see your company truck near my property again, I will sue you for corporate espionage and harassment. Now get out of my house before I have these officers arrest you." The lead officer gestured toward the hatch. "Time to go, kid. Let us clear out." Jason did not argue. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. He hoisted his tool bag over his shoulder and began walking toward the wooden attic stairs. Tyler hovered right behind him, practically shoving the young man forward. "Move it," Tyler snapped, making sure Jason did not get another look at the server room. I stood near the edge of the access hatch, feeling utterly defeated, my heart heavy with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. As Jason approached the ladder to climb down, Tyler pushed past him to speak to the officers, leaving Jason directly beside me for a brief second. The technician did not make eye contact. He kept his head bowed, looking like a thoroughly beaten man. But as he brushed past my side, I felt his hand quickly brush against mine. It was a swift, practiced movement, completely hidden from Tyler and the police officers. I felt a small, crumpled object being pressed firmly into my sweaty palm. Jason's fingers curled, mine closed over it. He gave my hand a single, reassuring squeeze and then descended the wooden stairs, disappearing into the sweltering hallway below. The heavy wooden stairs creaked loudly under Jason's heavy work boots. I listened closely to his fading footsteps, my tightly clenched right fist securely hiding the small object he had given me. The solid front door opened and closed with a heavy thud. The police officers were finally gone. The young technician was gone. I was entirely alone in this sweltering house with the man I had raised. Tyler turned around to face me. The fake smile melted away, replaced by cold fury. He did not yell. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He stepped closer, backing me up against the floral wallpaper. The heat radiating from him matched the oppressive temperature of the house. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, his gaze piercing through my soul. "What is wrong with your defective brain, Dad?" Tyler hissed. "Do you have any idea what you just risked? You brought armed police into my space. You jeopardized a sensitive operation because you cannot distinguish reality from your senile hallucinations. You embarrassed me in front of the authorities. I stood there, my heart pounding, fighting every instinct to punch his arrogant face. I am an engineer. I am a man of science and logic. But right now, truth was a dangerous luxury I could not afford. I needed him to believe he was in absolute control. Tyler stepped closer, invading my space. Let me make this clear, he continued, his tone laced with venom. I hold the power of attorney over your medical decisions. You signed those legal papers 5 years ago when you had your mild stroke. If you ever pull a stupid stunt like this again, I will not hesitate. I will call a state-appointed psychiatrist tomorrow morning. I will have you declared legally incompetent before noon. You will spend your remaining days drooling into a plastic cup at a state nursing home while I sell this house. Do we understand each other? The cruelty of his words felt like a physical blow. This was the little boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in this very driveway. The boy whose college tuition I paid in full. Now he was threatening to erase my freedom and dignity. My pride screamed at me to fight back, to draw the heavy revolver tucked into my waistband, to demand answers about what was really behind that steel door. But I knew the law. I knew Tyler had the resources and legal standing to follow through on his threat. If I got locked in a psychiatric ward, whoever was trapped in that attic would surely die there. I had to swallow my pride. I had to play the long game. I forced my shoulders to slump in defeat. I let out a shaky breath and allowed my hands to begin trembling violently. I widened my eyes, filling them with the vacant, terrified confusion of a fragile man losing his grip on reality. I am sorry. Tyler, I whimpered, making my voice crack and pitch higher than normal. I am so sorry. I do not know what came over me. The extreme heat made my head spin. I thought I heard terrible things. The house was so hot, and I got terribly scared. Please do not put me in a home. I promise I will not call anyone else today. Tyler stared at me, his cold eyes searching my wrinkled face for any sign of deception. He watched my violently trembling hands, my hunched posture, my tearful expression. Slowly, the raging anger in his handsome face morphed into absolute disgust and arrogant triumph. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. Look at you. You are an absolute mess, just a pathetic old man. Go to your room, Dad. Stay entirely out of my way. I am going down to reset the main breakers. If I hear a single peep out of you, I will make that phone call. I nodded vigorously, playing the obedient broken elder to absolute perfection. I shuffled slowly down the hallway, dragging my feet heavily across the polished hardwood floor, keeping my head bowed low in total submission. I did not look back until I reached my master bedroom. I stepped inside quickly and closed the heavy oak door behind me, locking the deadbolt as quietly as humanly possible. The exact moment the brass lock clicked, my violent trembling stopped completely. My hunched posture straightened instantly. The confused, broken old man vanished entirely, replaced by the furious, highly focused civil engineer. I walked purposefully over to the edge of my large bed and sat down. The massive house was still completely silent. I took a very long, deep breath, steadily calming my racing heart. Slowly, I opened my tightly clenched right fist. My palm was completely slick with nervous sweat. Resting quietly in the exact center of my wrinkled hand was the small, crumpled object Jason had secretly slipped to me. I gently smoothed out the wrinkled material with my thumb. It was a brightly colored piece of cheap plastic packaging, a small torn wrapper from a commercial bag of gummy bears. But it was not just an empty wrapper. Stuck to the inside of the shiny plastic was a tiny half-eaten piece of red candy. Jason had texted me earlier that he found a tiny gap near the bottom rubber seal of that heavy steel door. This was exactly what he had managed to pull out from that small, hidden crevice. I stared intensely at the crushed red candy, my blood running colder than ice despite the suffocating heat of the dark bedroom. A $2 million corporate clean room. A highly secure, dust-free technical environment filled with sensitive microchips and liquid cooling pumps. Tyler had explained it all so perfectly to those gullible police officers. But my deeply logical mind snapped the final puzzle piece perfectly into place. Computer servers do not eat red gummy bears. I sat there in the heavy darkness of my bedroom, staring intently at that tiny piece of red gelatin for what felt like hours. The house had settled into a restless, suffocating quiet. The central air conditioning was still broken, leaving the indoor temperature hovering in the miserable upper 90s. But the oppressive heat pressing against my skin was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, calculating dread pooling in my stomach. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed with a faint crimson light, displaying 2:00 in the morning. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that ragged, uneven breathing Jason had described, echoing in my mind like a haunting rhythm. I carefully folded the plastic wrapper and placed it safely inside the breast pocket of my cotton shirt. I lay back down on the mattress, resting my head against the damp pillow, and stared straight up at the smooth white ceiling. For the first time all day, I forced my turbulent emotions aside. I stopped thinking like a terrified, betrayed father, and I started thinking like a veteran civil engineer. I had spent 40 years of my life designing commercial foundations, calculating load bearings, analyzing stress fractures, and ensuring that structures could withstand the immense pressures of gravity and time. I knew how buildings worked. More importantly, I knew exactly how this specific building worked because I had built it with my own 2 hands. My mind drifted back 30 years to the dusty construction site that eventually became this sprawling ranch house. I remembered the harsh Arizona sun beating down on my shoulders as I framed the roof. I remembered the distinct smell of fresh-cut pine and the heavy thud of my framing hammer hitting the nails. When I designed the attic space, it was strictly intended for basic ventilation and lightweight seasonal storage. I had used standard 2x6 wooden floor joists, spaced exactly 16 inches apart. In the world of structural engineering, that specific configuration has a very strict mathematical limit. It is designed to safely support a live load of exactly 40 pounds per square foot. I closed my eyes, visualizing the hidden room Tyler had revealed to the police officers earlier that afternoon. I pictured the massive metal server racks, the thick glass tubing, the dense clusters of computer processors, and the large industrial reservoirs of liquid cooling fluid. Tyler had confidently looked those seasoned police officers dead in the eye and claimed he was operating a $2 million cryptocurrency mining farm in that confined space. The mathematics simply did not add up. It was a complete structural impossibility. A single high-density server rack loaded with active mining equipment and liquid cooling hardware weighs roughly 2,000 pounds. Tyler claimed to have an entire row of them packed into a narrow, hermetically sealed clean room. If you concentrate that much immense physical weight onto a standard residential wooden frame, the laws of physics demand an immediate and visible reaction. The 2x6 pine joists would experience catastrophic deflection. The sheer downward force of thousands of pounds of solid steel and heavy liquid would cause the wooden beams to bend significantly under the extreme pressure. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling again. My master bedroom was located directly adjacent to the main hallway, right beneath the area where Tyler had built his heavy steel fortress. If there truly were thousands of pounds of heavy servers sitting right above my head, the drywall ceiling would be noticeably bowing downward. The rigid plaster compound along the seams would be cracking, splitting, and flaking away under the extreme structural tension. The wooden door frames in the hallway below would be warping out of shape, making the heavy doors stick or fail to close properly. But the ceiling above me was perfectly flat. The painted seams were completely flawless. The doors swung smoothly on their hinges without catching the floorboards. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. The servers were entirely fake. The flashing blue and green indicator lights, the deafening hum of the liquid cooling pumps, the impressive metallic racks. It was all a meticulously crafted, theatrical set. Tyler had probably constructed hollow aluminum frames, installed some cheap, programmable light, emitting diodes, and wired a heavy-duty audio speaker to play a continuous loop of industrial mechanical noise. He had built a flawless stage prop designed specifically to fool casual observers and intimidate local law enforcement. It was a brilliant, terrifying illusion meant to completely mask the true purpose of that hidden room. And the true purpose of that room, 8 red gummy bears. A sharp pang of sorrow twisted deeply in my chest, but I ruthlessly pushed it down. I could not afford to be emotional right now. I was dealing with a highly intelligent, methodical sociopath who had unlimited financial resources and a chilling capacity for manipulation. Tyler had anticipated every single variable. He had manipulated the police into officially documenting me as a delusional old man. He had established a legal foundation to have me committed to a psychiatric facility if I ever raised the alarm again. If I simply called the authorities back tomorrow, they would arrive with straitjackets instead of flashlights. I needed undeniable concrete proof. I needed irrefutable evidence of what was actually breathing behind that second steel partition. I needed something so visually shocking and undeniable that the police would have no choice but to breach that room immediately. But getting that evidence felt like an impossible puzzle. Tyler had turned my own home into a digital fortress. He had installed high-definition motion-activated cameras in the main hallway. The smart home system monitored every door, every window, and every sudden shift in ambient temperature. If I tried to walk down the hall, my movement would instantly ping his smartphone. If I tried to pick the locks on the attic door, the tamper sensors would alert him before I even got the first bolt open. I was effectively a prisoner in a house without bars, trapped by invisible tripwires and wireless signals. I lay in the sweltering darkness, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My engineering mind began to strip the complex problem down to its core components. I needed a blind spot. I needed to bypass the digital sensors using purely analog methods. I needed to see through a solid floor without making a single sound. The digital clock on my nightstand shifted to 3 o'clock in the morning. I slowly sat up on the edge of the mattress. A dangerous, brilliant plan was beginning to form. Morning arrived with a cruel baking intensity. The Arizona sun pierced through the gaps in my bedroom blinds, casting long, harsh shadows across the floorboards. At exactly 7 in the morning, I heard the heavy footsteps of my adoptive son walking down the hallway. Tyler had reset the main breakers late last night, restoring the central air conditioning. The house was finally cooling down, but the profound chill in my bones had absolutely nothing to do with the thermostat. There was a sharp knock on my door. I opened it slowly, playing my part. Tyler stood there dressed immaculately in a charcoal-tailored suit, a sleek leather briefcase gripped tightly in his right hand. He looked down at me with an expression of supreme authority. "I have an emergency meeting in Tucson today," he stated, his tone flat and uncompromising. "I will be gone until late this evening. The security system is fully armed. Do not touch the doors. Do not call anyone. Just sit in your chair and watch television. If I get a single alert on my phone, you know exactly what will happen tomorrow morning." I nodded slowly, casting my eyes downward in a display of pathetic obedience. "Have a safe trip," I mumbled quietly. Tyler scoffed, turning on his heel without another word. A minute later, I heard the heavy front door slam shut. The mechanical deadbolts engaged with their familiar heavy clicks. I walked over to the front window and peeked carefully through the slanted blinds. I watched his black luxury sedan pull out of the driveway and disappear down the sun-baked street. As soon as his car turned the corner, the frail, frightened old man routine vanished entirely. I had a very narrow window of time and a monumental physical task ahead of me. Tyler believed his digital fortress was completely impenetrable. He had installed high-definition cameras at both ends of the main hallway and sensitive motion sensors near every primary doorway. If I simply stepped out of my bedroom, and walked toward his locked home office. A push notification would hit his phone before I even turned the doorknob. But Tyler was a software guy. He understood code algorithms and digital perimeters. I was a veteran civil engineer. I understood the physical bones of the house. When I designed this property 30 years ago, I installed oversized commercial-grade galvanized steel ductwork for the heating and cooling system to maximize airflow in the punishing desert heat. The main trunk line ran directly from the utility space above my bedroom closet straight across the attic floorboards and branched right into the ceiling of what was now Tyler's locked office. The digital sensors monitored the living spaces below, but the internal ventilation shafts were completely unmonitored blind spots. The only problem was my age. I was 70 years old. My joints were stiff with arthritis, and my lower back constantly ached. Crawling through a cramped metal tube was going to be excruciating. I went to my closet and pulled out a heavy pair of denim work pants and a long-sleeved flannel shirt to protect my skin from sharp metal edges and fiberglass insulation. From my tool bench in the corner, I grabbed a flathead screwdriver, a pair of heavy leather work gloves, and a small, tightly rolled strip of black cotton fabric. I tied the thick cotton cloth securely over my eyes, pulling it tight against my temples. A blindfold might seem counterintuitive, but it was absolutely essential. The interior of those ancient ducts was filled with decades of sharp, microscopic metallic dust and loose fiberglass fibers. Without protective goggles, which I did not have in the house, a single loose shard getting into my cornea in the pitch-black space could permanently blind me. More importantly, using a flashlight would reflect off the galvanized steel, potentially bleeding light through the air registers in the hallway and triggering Tyler's ambient light sensors. I had to do this entirely in the dark. I had to rely completely on the architectural blueprint permanently etched into my memory. I climbed up onto a sturdy wooden chair inside my closet, reached up, and carefully popped the heavy square air return grill out of the ceiling. A rush of cold, conditioned air hit my face. I grabbed the edge of the opening, summoned every ounce of strength remaining in my aging muscles, and pulled myself up into the dark, echoing chamber of the ductwork. My shoulders barely cleared the sides. The cold metal pressed uncomfortably against my chest and back. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, adjusting to the absolute suffocating darkness behind the blindfold. I began to crawl. It was a slow, agonizing process. I pulled myself forward inch by inch, using my elbows and the rubber soles of my shoes to find traction on the smooth, slick steel. The deafening roar of the air handler rushed past my ears. My breathing was heavy and labored, echoing loudly inside the confined space. Every movement sent a sharp spike of pain shooting through my lower back and arthritic knees. But I forced myself to keep moving. I counted the ridges in the metal to track my distance. 1 yard, 2 yards. The smell of old dust and cold zinc filled my nostrils. I knew there was a sharp 90-degree right turn approaching. I reached out with my heavy leather glove, feeling the cold steel seam of the junction. I twisted my body painfully, contorting my spine to make the tight corner. I could feel the vibrations of the cooling unit thrumming through the floor of the duct. I was crawling directly underneath the hidden room where someone was being held captive. The thought of that terrified breathing gave me a sudden surge of adrenaline. I pushed forward, ignoring the burning ache in my tired muscles. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through the suffocating darkness, my gloved hand touched the hard, slatted surface of an air vent register. I had reached the drop point. I was positioned exactly above the center of Tyler's locked home office. I carefully reached down and used the flathead screwdriver to loosen the internal screws holding the heavy metal grill in place. I had to move with excruciating slowness, ensuring not a single screw or piece of metal dropped to the hardwood floor below. Finally, the grill came loose. I slid it quietly back into the duct beside me. I pulled the black cotton blindfold down from my eyes, blinking against the sudden influx of daylight streaming up from the room beneath me. I shifted my weight, swinging my legs down through the narrow opening in the ceiling, and dropped slowly to the floor. I landed heavily on the plush carpet, my knees buckling slightly under the impact. I let out a quiet gasp of pain, but quickly steadied myself. I stood up and looked around. Tyler's office was spotless, cold, and meticulously organized. The walls were lined with expensive, abstract art, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. On top of the desk sat a high-end computer with 3 massive monitors. I ignored the computer entirely. I knew Tyler would have heavily encrypted the hard drives with complex biometric passwords. I was not looking for digital files. I was looking for the paper trail. Paranoia always forces criminals to keep physical records of their most important documents. My eyes locked onto the far corner of the room. Sitting quietly in the shadows was a heavy industrial-grade steel filing cabinet. It looked completely out of place in the elegant modern office. It was an older model secured by a complex mechanical tubular lock right at the top drawer. Digital keypads can be hacked by software, but a purely physical lock requires a physical key or a very specific set of skills to bypass. Tyler thought keeping the heavy office door locked from the outside was enough to protect this cabinet. He was incredibly wrong. I walked over to the cold steel structure and knelt down on the soft carpet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small specialized tension wrench and a stainless steel lock-picking tool I had kept from my early days on commercial construction sites. I took a deep, steadying breath, listening to the absolute silence of the house. I slid the metal tools gently into the rigid keyway, feeling the delicate mechanical pins resting inside the dark cylinder. I applied a slight pressure, waiting for the first satisfying click. The tiny metal pin inside the heavy tubular lock finally gave way. I heard the sharp, distinct mechanical click echo through the silent office. I slowly rotated the tension wrench, and the heavy steel locking bar disengaged. I pulled out my lock-picking tools and slid them into my pocket, my heart pounding like a trapped bird. I grabbed the cold metal handle of the top drawer and pulled it open. The drawer glided outward on smooth steel tracks, revealing row after row of meticulously organized manila folders. Each folder was neatly labeled with typed white tabs. I began to flip through them rapidly, my calloused fingers searching specifically for anything related to computer hardware, cryptocurrency exchanges, or industrial cooling equipment. If Tyler truly had a $2 million server farm running upstairs, there had to be physical warranties, shipping manifests, and massive electrical bills to support it. But there was absolutely nothing. I searched the entire first drawer and moved down to the second. Still nothing. The complete absence of any technological paperwork confirmed my worst fears. The server room was a complete fabrication. But what I found in the bottom drawer was infinitely worse than a fake computer rig. Tucked away in the very back of the lowest drawer was a thick, unmarked red folder. I pulled it out and laid it flat on the carpeted floor. I opened the cover, and my eyes scanned the first document. It was a commercial invoice from a specialized medical supply company based out of Nevada. I read the line items and my breath caught painfully in my throat. Tyler had purchased a high-capacity pediatric oxygen concentrator. The next invoice was from a wholesale pharmacy. It detailed the purchase of bulk liquid children's vitamins, high-calorie pediatric nutritional shakes, and heavy-duty immune system supplements. My hands began to shake violently as I flipped to the third piece of paper. It was a receipt from an industrial acoustic supply warehouse. He had ordered 60 square feet of heavy military-grade soundproofing, foam solid steel reinforced deadbolts, and a digital carbon monoxide monitoring system. The pieces of the terrifying puzzle were violently slamming together in my mind. The uneven breathing, the lock on the outside of the door, the red gummy bear wrapper. Tyler was not protecting expensive hardware from thieves. He had constructed a soundproof medical prison cell inside my attic, and he was keeping a child inside it. A wave of profound, sickening horror washed over me, making the edges of my vision blur. Who was in that room? Why would my wealthy adoptive son kidnap and imprison a child in our own home? I dug deeper into the red folder, my fingers slipping slightly on the glossy paper due to the cold sweat breaking out on my palms. Beneath the stack of disturbing medical invoices lay a massive, heavy legal document. It was bound with a thick blue ribbon and stamped with the official seal of a major wealth management firm. I recognized the emblem immediately. It was the firm that handled my late wife's estate. I opened the thick document, scanning the complex legal jargon until I reached the primary disbursement clause. The words seemed to burn directly into my retinas. The trust fund was valued at exactly $12 million. It was established by my late wife, specifically designated for her biological descendants. Because Tyler was adopted, he was completely excluded from the primary inheritance. But there was a devastating loophole. The document stated that if the biological heir was a minor, the legal guardian would receive full control of the financial assets provided they submitted a verified biometric fingerprint scan of the child to the trust executors every 5 years to prove the beneficiary was still alive and well. The room started spinning. 4 years ago, my biological daughter died in a horrific fiery car crash on the interstate. Tyler had been the one to identify the vehicle. He had looked me dead in the eye and told me that her young son, my biological grandson Leo, had also perished in the flames. There was not enough left of the vehicle to recover the bodies. I had believed him. I had mourned my family until I had no tears left to shed. But looking at this legal document, the horrific truth finally clawed its way into the light. Tyler had lied. He had somehow pulled little Leo from that wreckage, faked the boy's death, and locked him inside a soundproof box in my attic. He did it to steal the $12 million. He was keeping the boy alive just enough to harvest his fingerprint every 5 years to keep the trust fund active. My adoptive son was a monster of unimaginable proportions. I felt a scream rising in my chest, a primal howl of grief and pure rage, but I violently bit down on my own tongue, tasting hot copper blood. I could not make a sound. I had to save my grandson. I had to destroy Tyler. I gathered the horrific documents and placed them back inside the red folder. I carefully stacked the medical invoices perfectly so Tyler would never suspect anything was moved. I pushed the folder deep into the bottom drawer and slid the heavy track closed. I grabbed my picking tools, preparing to lock the steel cabinet. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing electronic chirp echoed loudly through the completely silent house. It was the distinct sound of the smart home security system suddenly disarming. My blood ran entirely cold. Heavy mechanical clanking followed immediately afterward. The massive brass deadbolts on the front door were automatically sliding open. Tyler had returned home hours early. Heavy footsteps stepped onto the hardwood floor in the main hallway. The solid wood door slammed shut. "Dad!" "I am back," Tyler called out menacingly. Panic exploded inside my chest. I scrambled up the chair and threw myself into the ceiling vent as the doorknob slowly turned. My boots cleared the edge of the vent just as the heavy office door swung inward. I lay flat on the cold steel inside the ductwork, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Through the slats of the grill I had hastily slid back into place, I saw the top of Tyler's head. He walked into the center of the room and stopped. The silence was absolute. Did he notice the smell of sweat? Did he see a disturbance in the carpet? My heart hammered against my ribs. Tyler let out a long sigh, dropped his leather briefcase onto the desk, and walked over to the filing cabinet. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying my lock-picking had not left any scratches on the tubular lock. A few agonizing seconds passed. Then the office door opened and closed again. The deadbolt clicked into place. He had not noticed. I did not waste a second. I began the grueling crawl back through the ventilation system. Every muscle in my 70-year-old body screamed in protest. My elbows were bruised and my knees felt filled with broken glass. The journey back seemed to take twice as long, fueled entirely by the adrenaline of sheer terror. When I reached the drop point above my bedroom closet, I lowered myself down, replaced the ceiling grill, and stripped off my dusty clothes. I hid them at the bottom of my laundry basket and washed my face. I put on a clean shirt, sat in my armchair, and turned on the television just as Tyler knocked on my door. He pushed the door open without waiting for an answer. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of defiance. "Just checking on you, Dad," he said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I hope you had a quiet day." I kept my eyes glued to the television screen, letting my hands tremble slightly on my lap. "Very quiet, Tyler. I just watched the news. I am very tired." He smiled a thin, completely hollow smile. "Good. Get some rest. You need to keep your strength up." He closed the door, leaving me alone with the horrifying truth. The hours that followed were pure psychological torture. I sat in the dim light of my bedroom, watching the sun sink below the Arizona horizon, replacing the blistering heat with the suffocating darkness of night. I knew what I found in those documents, but paper was not enough. I needed visual confirmation. I needed to see exactly what was happening inside that soundproof box. I needed to know for certain that my grandson Leo was still alive in there. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the terrified face of a child trapped in absolute silence. If I called the police based solely on a stolen folder, Tyler would destroy the evidence, claim the invoices were for charity, and hide the boy somewhere else before the authorities could breach the room. I had to catch him off guard. I needed undeniable proof. I waited until the digital clock on my nightstand glowed with the bright red numbers indicating 3 o'clock in the morning. The house was dead silent. Tyler was a heavy sleeper, but I could not take any chances. I slipped out of bed, keeping my socks on to muffle my footsteps on the hardwood floors. I crept silently down the hallway and slipped into the small guest bathroom. This bathroom was positioned directly adjacent to the main corridor, placing its ceiling perfectly underneath the precise location of the hidden attic room. I quietly closed the bathroom door and locked it. I opened the cabinet beneath the sink and pulled out a canvas tool bag I hid there months ago for plumbing repairs. Inside the bag was an old-fashioned hand-cranked drill. Power drills were far too loud. The high-pitched whine of an electric motor would instantly wake Tyler and trigger the acoustic sensors of his security system. I needed something silent. I attached a microscopic 2mm drill bit to the chuck. It was incredibly thin, barely thicker than mechanical pencil lead. I also pulled out a cheap, flexible fiber optic plumbing camera. It was a simple device I purchased years ago to inspect clogged drainage pipes. It had a tiny lens at the end of a long, bendable wire connected to a small battery-powered handheld monitor. I stepped up onto the edge of the porcelain bathtub, balancing my weight carefully to avoid making the tub creak. I reached up toward the smooth white ceiling. I positioned the sharp tip of the 2mm drill bit directly between the wooden joists, pressing it firmly against the painted drywall. I grabbed the wooden handle of the hand drill and began to turn the crank slowly. It was physically exhausting work. The awkward angle burned the muscles in my shoulders and neck. I had to maintain a perfectly steady rhythmic motion to avoid snapping the fragile bit. The soft scraping sound of metal cutting through hardened plaster seemed deafening to my own ears, but I knew it would not carry past the walls. Dust began to sprinkle down onto my face, stinging my eyes, but I did not blink. After 10 agonizing minutes of constant silent drilling, I felt a sudden release of pressure. The bit had punched through the drywall and pierced the layer of soundproofing foam Tyler had installed beneath the attic floorboards. I carefully withdrew the drill, leaving a completely invisible pinhole in the ceiling. I picked up the fiber optic camera, turned on the handheld monitor, and dimmed the brightness of the small screen to its lowest setting. My hands were shaking violently as I guided the tiny illuminated lens into the microscopic hole. I pushed it upward, feeling resistance as it chewed through the foam. The camera screen flickered on. I dropped to my knees, clapping a hand over my mouth to muffle a scream. The grainy image on the small handheld monitor stabilized, cutting through the pitch-black darkness with its tiny built-in light-emitting diode. I stared at the 2-inch screen, my entire body violently shaking. The breath caught in my throat, forming a sharp, agonizing knot that refused to loosen. I had prepared myself to see something terrible. I had prepared my engineering mind to process the mechanical reality of a hidden vault. But absolutely nothing could have prepared my soul for the devastating image transmitting through that microscopic lens. There were no massive computer servers. There was no $2 million cryptocurrency mining operation. Just as I had deduced from the structural mathematics, the flashing blue and green lights Tyler had shown the police were nothing more than a cheap theatrical facade. A hollow metal rack filled with dummy panels and battery-powered lights stood near the heavy steel door, acting as a visual shield. Behind that fake rack, the true nature of the hidden room was exposed. The walls, the ceiling, and the floorboards were completely covered in thick, dark gray acoustic foam. It was the exact military-grade soundproofing material I had seen on the invoices in Tyler's locked filing cabinet. The foam was designed to absorb every single sound wave, turning the small enclosed space into a suffocating, dead silent tomb. My trembling hand adjusted the dial on the handheld monitor, slowly panning the flexible camera wire deeper into the padded cell. In the far corner of the room, resting directly on the foam-covered floor, was a small stained twin mattress. Beside the mattress sat a compact medical machine. It was a pediatric oxygen concentrator. A clear plastic tube ran from the machine, trailing across the floor like a lifeline. The machine hummed with a low, rhythmic suction. That was the uneven, shallow breathing Jason had heard. That was the mechanical heartbeat of this hidden prison. I pushed the fiber optic wire slightly further through the ceiling, angling the tiny lens downward toward the mattress. A small, frail figure lay curled beneath a thin gray blanket. My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. It was a young boy. He looked to be about 7 years old. His tiny body was curled into a tight, defensive ball. He was devastatingly malnourished. His arms, protruding from the short sleeves of a faded t-shirt, were little more than skin and bone. His complexion was incredibly pale, holding the sickening, translucent pallor of someone who had not felt the warmth of natural sunlight in years. The clear plastic oxygen cannula was looped securely over his small ears, resting beneath his nose. His chest rose and fell in a slow, labored rhythm, perfectly matching the mechanical hum of the concentrator beside him. Tears, hot, thick, and blinding, streamed down my weathered face. I pressed my knuckles against my lips, biting down hard on my own flesh to stop myself from howling in pure agony. The boy shifted weakly on the mattress, reaching out a fragile hand to clutch a worn, dirty, stuffed bear. The movement was incredibly slow, drained of all the vibrant energy a child his age should naturally possess. Tyler had kept him alive. He had fed him the bulk vitamins and nutritional shakes I saw on the invoices, giving him just enough sustenance to survive, but keeping him weak enough to prevent any chance of resistance or escape. I needed to see his face. I needed to know who this innocent child was, even though a dark, terrifying intuition was already clawing at the edges of my mind. My hands were slick with cold sweat, making it difficult to grip the smooth plastic controls of the monitor. I carefully twisted the dial, engaging the digital zoom feature on the cheap plumbing camera. The grainy pixels on the screen enlarged, blurring slightly, before the autofocus corrected the image. The camera lens was now virtually hovering just a few feet above the sleeping child. As if sensing the microscopic intrusion, the boy shifted restlessly. He let out a soft, muted cough that barely registered on the internal microphone. He turned his head slowly upon the flat pillow, rolling away from the wall and facing directly toward the center of the room. The tiny light from my camera briefly illuminated the side of his face and the back of his neck. My blood turned to absolute ice. The digital monitor nearly slipped from my numb fingers. Time completely stopped in that sweltering, silent bathroom. The air vanished from my lungs. There, located just behind the shell of his right ear, resting against his pale, delicate skin, was a very distinct, deeply pigmented birthmark. It was shaped exactly like the letter V. I collapsed forward, my forehead resting heavily against the cold porcelain rim of the bathtub. The world spun violently around me. The pieces of the red folder, The trust fund document requiring a biological fingerprint every 5 years. The horrific fiery car crash 4 years ago that supposedly claimed the lives of my daughter and my grandson. Tyler's calm, reassuring voice as he told me there was nothing left to bury. It had all been a meticulously calculated, monstrous lie. Tyler had pulled the child from the wreckage before the flames consumed the vehicle. He had brought the boy here into the attic of the very house I built and locked him away in a soundproof box. I looked back at the small monitor, my vision completely blurred by a fresh wave of agonizing tears. I stared at the frail, sleeping face of the little boy who had been robbed of the son of his mother and of his childhood. The boy Tyler was keeping as a living, breathing key to a $12 million inheritance. The child lying on that dirty mattress was Leo. He was my biological grandson. And against all the absolutely terrible and incredibly cruel odds stacked against him, he was alive. I stared at the tiny monitor until the image blurred into a sea of gray pixels. The child lying on that dirty mattress was Leo. He was my biological grandson. And against all the absolutely terrible and incredibly cruel odds stacked against him, he was alive. I pulled the fiber optic camera out of the ceiling, my hands shaking so violently that the wire slapped against the porcelain bathtub. I sank onto the cold tile floor of the bathroom, pulling my knees to my chest. A silent, agonizing sob ripped through my throat. I pressed my face into my hands, weeping with a depth of sorrow I had not felt in years. The tears were a chaotic mixture of profound relief and unspeakable horror. For 4 years, I had mourned a ghost. For 4 years, I had stood over a small marble headstone in the local cemetery, whispering apologies to an empty grave. The memories of that horrific night rushed back to me with the force of a physical blow. It was exactly 4 years ago, during a rare torrential desert rainstorm. The police called my house at 2 in the morning. They told me there had been a devastating accident on the interstate highway. My only biological daughter had been driving home from a family gathering. Her vehicle had hydroplaned, crashed through the concrete guardrail, and plummeted down a steep embankment before bursting into flames. I was too devastated, too paralyzed by the sudden shock, to even speak. Tyler had immediately stepped in. He had played the role of the strong, capable son. He drove to the coroner office. He spoke with the highway patrol. He handled all the terrible, gruesome details that a grieving father could not bear to face. When Tyler finally returned home the next morning, his clothes smelled of smoke and rain. He sat me down on the living room sofa, placed his hands on my shoulders, and delivered the final, crushing blow. He told me the fire had been too intense. He said the police found the melted remains of a child's safety seat in the back of the burned wreckage. He looked me directly in the eyes, shedding perfect, calculated tears, and told me that my little grandson, Leo, had perished in the flames alongside his mother. There was nothing left to recover. There was nothing left to bury. I trusted him completely. I handed over all the funeral arrangements to him. I signed whatever legal documents he placed in front of me because my entire world had just been reduced to ashes. But sitting on the cold bathroom floor, the absolute monstrosity of his deception finally crystallized in my mind. The thick legal document I had found hidden in his steel filing cabinet earlier that afternoon was the key to this entire nightmare. Before my late wife passed away a decade ago, she had inherited a substantial family fortune. She placed exactly $12 million into an ironclad trust fund. The stipulations of that trust were incredibly specific. The money was strictly designated for her direct biological descendants. Because Tyler was an adoptive child, he was legally excluded from the primary inheritance. He could never touch the principal amount. But there was a single devastating loophole written into the fine print of that legal paperwork. If the primary biological heir was a minor, the designated legal guardian would be granted full administrative control over the financial assets. They could draw from the millions to cover living expenses, education, and investments. But the wealth management firm required concrete proof that the child was still alive to prevent fraud. They mandated a live biometric fingerprint scan of the beneficiary every 5 years to release the next block of funding. Tyler did not pull little Leo from that wreckage out of compassion. He did not save his nephew because he loved him. He took that innocent child from the crash site before the authorities could properly document the scene, and he locked him away in a soundproof box. Tyler was keeping the boy alive for one reason and one reason only. Leo was not a human being to him. He was a biological access key. He was a living password to a $12 million bank account. Tyler was feeding him just enough liquid vitamins and canned oxygen to keep his heart beating, but keeping him malnourished and weak so he could never cry out, never fight back, and never escape. In a year, the next 5-year trust cycle would require a new biometric scan. Tyler would simply walk into that padded cell, press the frail finger of a terrified 7-year-old boy onto a digital scanner, and walk away with millions of dollars in fresh capital. The sheer magnitude of the evil operating inside my own home was almost impossible to comprehend. I had shared meals with this monster. I had praised his business acumen. I had thanked him for taking care of me in my old age. All the while, the blood of my family was on his hands, and the last remaining piece of my heart was locked in a dark, suffocating prison directly above my living room ceiling. The agonizing sorrow that had paralyzed me just moments ago suddenly began to evaporate, replaced by something entirely different. A cold, dark, and utterly ruthless anger began to spread through my veins. It was a terrifying, quiet rage, the kind of rage that does not scream or throw punches but patiently builds a guillotine. I slowly stood up from the bathroom floor. My joints popped, and my muscles ached, but the frailty of the 70-year-old man was completely gone. I carefully packed the drill and camera. I wiped the dust from the rim. I swept the floor clean. I looked in the mirror. My eyes were red, but my jaw was set like solid granite. Tyler thought he had won, but I was about to dismantle his entire life. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark corner of my bedroom, watching the hands of the wall clock drag through the early morning hours. I did not sleep a single wink. My mind was a chaotic storm of grief rage and meticulous calculation. The Arizona sun eventually began to rise, casting a pale, cold morning light through the slats of my window blinds. It was another scorching summer day outside, but inside my chest the temperature was absolute zero. I had to mentally prepare myself for the most difficult performance of my entire life. I had to look into the eyes of the man who had stolen my grandson, the man who lied about the death of my daughter, and pretend I was completely oblivious. I walked to the mirror above my dresser and studied my reflection. I looked old, frail, and defeated. Dark circles under my eyes and the pale, drawn skin of my face played perfectly into the role I needed to assume. I practiced a weak, submissive smile. I let my shoulders slump forward, hiding the tension coiled inside my muscles. Around 7 in the morning, I heard the familiar sounds of the house waking up. The floorboards in the hallway creaked slightly as Tyler stepped out of his master suite. A few minutes later, the aromatic smell of expensive dark roast coffee began to drift down the corridor from the kitchen. It was a sickeningly domestic, peaceful scent that starkly contrasted with the monstrous reality hidden just a few feet above our heads. I sat on the edge of my bed, folding my hands in my lap, and waited. The heavy footsteps slowly approached my door. There was a soft, polite knock. It was the knock of a caring, devoted son checking on his elderly father. The sheer hypocrisy of that simple sound made my stomach churn with violent nausea. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. "Come in," I called out, making sure my voice sounded thin, tired, and entirely submissive. The brass doorknob turned slowly, and the heavy oak door swung open to reveal the devil standing directly inside my bedroom doorway. Tyler stepped into the room holding a steaming ceramic mug. He was dressed in a casual but expensive linen shirt, looking completely relaxed and perfectly rested. There was not a single trace of guilt or burden on his handsome face. "Good morning, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with artificial warmth and manufactured concern. "I made you fresh coffee. I thought you might need a little pick-me-up after the stressful events of yesterday." He walked across the room and extended the mug to me. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to stand up, grab him by the throat, and squeeze the life out of him. My hands ached with the primal urge to inflict absolute agony upon him. I wanted to scream the name of Leo. I wanted to smash the coffee mug against the wall and demand the key to the attic. But the image of my frail, malnourished grandson flashed in my mind, anchoring me to reality. I reached out with trembling hands and took the warm ceramic mug. I looked up at Tyler, forcing my eyes to fill with tears of pathetic gratitude. "Thank you, Tyler," I whispered weakly. "You did not have to do this for me." I brought the rim of the ceramic mug to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The dark coffee tasted like ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it down, maintaining my frail facade. I lowered the mug and gave him the weak, broken smile I had practiced in the mirror for hours. "I am so sorry about the confusion yesterday," I murmured. "I do not know what is happening to my mind lately. The extreme heat confused me so badly. You have been so incredibly patient with me. You really are a good son, Tyler. I am very lucky to have you looking out for me." The words felt like jagged glass scraping against my throat, but they had the intended effect. The chest of Tyler puffed out slightly. A look of supreme, arrogant satisfaction washed over his face. He reached out and patted my shoulder patronizingly. "Do not worry about it, Dad," he said smoothly. "We all get old. You just need to rest and let me handle the complicated things. Just stay out of the attic, stay out of the heat, and let me take care of this family." "I will, Tyler," I promised, lowering my gaze to the floor. "I will stay completely out of your way." Tyler gave my shoulder one last pat, turned around, and walked out of the room, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The moment the brass latch clicked into place, the pathetic smile vanished entirely from my face. I set the mug down on the nightstand so hard that the dark liquid spilled over the edge. I began to pace the bedroom, my mind analyzing my next move. Every instinct told me to pick up the analog landline and call the police dispatcher right now. I could tell them about the camera, the drill hole, and the stolen trust fund documents. But my decades of engineering experience taught me to always calculate potential points of failure before executing a plan. If the police arrived right now, Tyler would not surrender quietly. He was wealthy, highly intelligent, and completely ruthless. He would invoke his rights and call his high-paid corporate defense attorneys. Those lawyers would file injunctions and tie up the legal process. During that chaotic delay, Tyler could order his accomplices to move the child, or worse, he might simply kill the boy to permanently destroy the evidence. If I wanted to save my grandson and ensure Tyler paid for his crimes, I could not just report him. I needed to trap him. I needed to trap him. The local police department was completely out of the question. After the embarrassing spectacle yesterday, the officers had officially documented me as an unstable, delusional old man suffering from dementia. If I dialed 911 again, the dispatcher would flag my address immediately. They would send a psychiatric evaluation team instead of a tactical unit. Tyler would play the victim, hand me over to the doctors, and then quietly dispose of the evidence before anyone thought to look behind that heavy door again. I needed allies who operated completely outside the jurisdiction of the local police. I needed men who would not be charmed by an expensive suit and a corporate lie. I waited until Tyler retreated to his home office to begin his conference calls. I listened closely until the heavy mahogany door clicked shut and his muffled voice echoed down the hallway. Once I was certain he was occupied, I quietly slipped out the side door and stepped into the suffocating heat of the attached garage. The garage was a cluttered sanctuary of my past, filled with dusty tools, leftover lumber, and forgotten boxes. Tyler hated this space. He considered it a junkyard and never bothered to inspect it, relying solely on the electronic sensors on the garage doors to maintain his security perimeter. I walked to the very back corner, moving past a stack of old paint cans, and pulled a heavy canvas tarp off my wooden workbench. Resting underneath the dusty tarp was my vintage analog amateur radio transmitter. It was a heavy military-grade communication device I had salvaged and rebuilt decades ago. It operated entirely on encrypted radio frequencies, completely bypassing Tyler and his digital network. Routers, smart home applications, and cellular signal monitors. There was absolutely no way for him to intercept or track an analog radio transmission. I flipped the heavy metal toggle switches. The old machine hummed to life, its vacuum tubes glowing with a faint, warm amber light. I grabbed the heavy black microphone, adjusted the tuning dial to a highly specific restricted frequency, and pressed the transmission button. Bravo 6, this is Architect. I repeat, Bravo 6, this is Architect. Requesting an immediate priority line. I spoke into the microphone using a call sign I had not uttered in over 20 years. I released the button and waited, listening to the crackle of atmospheric static. A full minute passed. Just as my heart began to sink, the static broke, replaced by a deep, gravelly voice. Architect, this is Bravo 6. It has been a long time, Rick. Are you in trouble? A wave of profound relief washed over me. The man on the other end of the frequency was William. We had served together as combat engineers long before I started building suburban houses. Today, William was a high-ranking commander for a specialized state-level tactical task force that worked directly with a severe crimes division of Child Protective Services. William, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice low but intensely urgent. I have a confirmed hostage situation at my primary residence. My adoptive son is holding a 7-year-old boy inside a fortified, soundproof cell built into my attic. He is using a fake computer server farm as a visual front to deter the local police. I have visual evidence obtained through a fiber optic camera. The boy is severely malnourished and being kept alive on supplemental oxygen. The motive is a $12 million trust fund inheritance. The radio was completely silent for a few seconds. When William finally responded, the friendly warmth in his voice was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, calculating tone of a tactical commander. Rick, did you notify the local authorities? I explained exactly what happened the previous afternoon. I told him how Tyler manipulated the officers, how he used my age against me, and how a standard police raid would likely result in the destruction of evidence or the death of the child. William understood immediately. If we hit the house blind, the suspect could barricade himself inside the vault, William explained over the static. If it is a steel-reinforced door with external deadbolts, it will take our breach team at least 10 minutes to cut through the frame with thermal torches. That is more than enough time for him to silence the witness and claim it was a tragic medical accident. We need to catch him with the door open. We need him separated from the boy. I looked down at my weathered hands, my engineering mind rapidly calculating the structural variables of a trap. I can get the door open, I told William. I can manipulate him into unlocking the vault voluntarily. But I am going to need you to have a tactical team positioned completely out of sight, ready to breach the house the exact second he drops his guard. I need ghost units, William. No sirens, no flashing lights. Tyler has a digital perimeter set up to detect emergency vehicles. If he hears you coming, the trap will fail. I can authorize a covert deployment, William replied firmly. I will assemble a specialized state team. We will use unmarked utility vans and approach on foot through the neighboring properties to bypass the street sensors. But Rick, you have to create a flawless distraction. You need to give this monster a reason to abandon his caution and walk right into the open. What is your play? I took a deep breath, staring at the glowing amber tubes of the radio. He is doing all of this for a $12 million trust fund. The only way to blind a greedy man is to offer him exactly what he wants. I am going to hand him the entire fortune on a silver platter. I will coordinate the timing with you tomorrow morning. Just have your men ready to break down my front door when I give the signal. I powered down the heavy radio, listening to the tubes hum before fading into silence. I pulled the canvas tarp back over the workbench, ensuring the garage looked exactly as I had found it. The trap was officially in motion. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I did not bother making coffee or pretending to watch television. I had a very specific schedule to keep. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number of an old trusted friend. His name was Arthur, a retired estate lawyer who owed me a favor from our younger days. I explained the situation to him in broad strokes, leaving out the horrifying details of the attic, but making it perfectly clear that I needed a set of ironclad legal documents drafted immediately. I told him I needed to completely dissolve my late wife's $12 million trust fund and transfer all administrative and financial rights unconditionally to my adoptive son. I asked him to bring a licensed public notary to the house by 10 o'clock sharp. When the doorbell rang later that morning, Tyler was sitting in the living room, casually scrolling through his tablet while sipping a glass of sparkling water. He looked up, his brow furrowing in deep suspicion, as I walked past him to open the heavy wooden door. Arthur stepped inside, dressed in a sharp navy suit, accompanied by a quiet woman carrying a thick leather briefcase. Tyler immediately stood up, his relaxed posture vanishing, replaced by a defensive, coiled aggression. "Dad, what is the meaning of this?" Tyler demanded, stepping between me and the guests. "Who are these people, and why did you invite them here without my permission? I told you I did not want strangers inside the house." I looked at Tyler, allowing my shoulders to sag and my hands to tremble slightly. I let out a long, pathetic sigh, embodying the completely defeated, broken man he believed me to be. "Tyler, this is Arthur," I said, my voice wavering perfectly. "He is an estate attorney, and this is his notary. I asked them to come here today because I have made a final decision about my future." Tyler narrowed his eyes, his gaze darting between the lawyer and the briefcase. "What decision, Dad? What are you talking about?" I gestured weakly toward the formal dining table. "Please let us all sit down. I want to explain everything to you." Reluctantly, Tyler took a seat at the head of the glass table, his arms crossed tightly. Arthur unlatched his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, placing them neatly in the center of the table. I sat down across from Tyler, looking him directly in his cold, calculating eyes. "Tyler." I started, keeping my tone soft and filled with sorrow. "The events of yesterday really opened my eyes. You were entirely right. My mind is fading. I am hallucinating things. I am calling the police for no reason. I am becoming a severe danger to myself and a massive burden to your incredibly important work." Tyler did not interrupt. He sat perfectly still, listening intently as I fed his massive ego. "I cannot manage my own affairs anymore." I continued, letting a single tear slip down my weathered cheek. "The maintenance of this large property, the stress of my finances, it is all too much for my failing brain. I do not want to end up forcing you to put me in a state psychiatric ward. I want to leave with whatever small shred of dignity I have left, so I have instructed Arthur to draft the necessary paperwork to completely liquidate my estate. I am moving to a specialized retirement home in Florida. I leave tomorrow morning on a one-way flight." Tyler maintained his stoic expression, but I could see the subtle shift in his posture. The defensive tension was slowly melting away. "And what about the finances?" Tyler asked, his voice carefully neutral, masking the ravenous greed I knew was boiling just beneath the surface. I pushed the thick stack of legal papers across the smooth glass table. "I want to liquidate the entire $12 million trust fund today," I said, clearly ensuring every word hung heavily in the silent room. "I am signing it over to you, unconditionally. You will have full access to the principal amount. You can use it to expand your business or do whatever you wish. I just want peace." For a long moment, the room was completely silent. I watched Tyler look down at the legal documents. His eyes scanned the bold headings, the official seals, and the signature lines. The bait was massive. It was the exact prize he had spent 4 years torturing an innocent child to slowly acquire. Now it was sitting right in front of him, instantly accessible without any waiting. The sheer magnitude of the greed radiating from him was almost palpable. His eyes widened slightly as the reality of 12 million unrestricted dollars washed over his sociopathic mind. This was the ultimate victory for him. He looked up at me, a sickening, triumphant smile slowly spreading across his handsome face. "Dad, I think this is incredibly wise," Tyler said, his voice dripping with fake compassion. "Florida will be so much better for your health. I am glad you are finally seeing reason." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his expensive silver pen. He hovered the tip of the pen over the primary signature line on the final page of the contract. But right before the ink touched the thick paper, Tyler suddenly stopped. His hand froze in midair. The triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second as a dark realization crossed his mind. He slowly lowered the silver pen and looked over at Arthur. "To completely dissolve this specific trust and transfer the principal, I need to provide the final biometric authorization from the designated beneficiary files," Tyler said smoothly, covering his tracks with corporate jargon. "I have the digital authorization secured on an offline hard drive upstairs in my clean room." He turned back to me, the greed in his eyes burning brighter than the sun. "Give me exactly 10 minutes, Dad," Tyler said, pushing his chair back and standing up from the dining table. "I need to go up to the attic to retrieve the final biometric scan. Then we can sign everything and make this official." Tyler turned on his heel and walked briskly out of the dining room. I sat perfectly still, listening to his heavy footsteps ascend the wooden staircase. He was going to walk into that soundproof room and force my terrified grandson to press his tiny finger onto a digital scanner. My heart pounded furiously, but I forced my expression to remain entirely blank. Arthur, the lawyer, looked at me with mild concern, sensing the tension, but I gave him a reassuring nod. We sat in absolute silence for exactly 9 minutes. Then the heavy footsteps returned. Tyler walked back into the dining room, his face flushed with adrenaline and pure greed. He held a small universal serial bus drive. He placed it onto the glass table. "Here it is," Tyler announced, practically vibrating with excitement. "The final biometric authorization is securely loaded. We are completely ready to proceed." Arthur nodded. He uncapped his fountain pen and began executing the documents. He explained the legal ramifications, ensuring I was of sound mind. I played my part flawlessly. I spoke in a quiet voice, confirming I understood I was giving away my entire estate. I picked up the pen and signed my name on page after page. With every stroke of ink, I watched the triumph in Tyler grow brighter. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had outsmarted a senile old man and secured a $12 million empire. The notary stamped the final page, officially dissolving the trust. The money was his. The moment Arthur and the notary walked out the front door, the atmosphere in the house shifted violently. The polite, concerned son vanished instantly. Tyler turned to me, his face hardened with cold authority. "All right, Dad," he said briskly, glancing at his wristwatch. "Your flight to Orlando leaves at 3:00 this afternoon. I already purchased your ticket online while you were sleeping. I want you packed and ready to leave in exactly 1 hour. There is no reason to delay your departure." I widened my eyes, feigning shock and hurt. "But Tyler," I stammered, my voice trembling. "I need time to sort through my things. I have 30 years of memories in this house." Tyler let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "You are moving to a retirement facility, Dad. You do not need winter coats, and you certainly do not need boxes of useless junk. You are taking one suitcase with your clothing and your medications. That is it. Everything else stays here. I will have a junk removal company clear out your bedroom tomorrow morning. Now get moving. I have a lot of business to handle today, and I need quiet." I lowered my head, allowing a pathetic sob to escape my lips, and shuffled slowly toward my master bedroom. Tyler followed closely behind me, leaning against the doorframe to monitor my move. I pulled a large leather suitcase from the closet and began tossing shirts inside. My hands shook as I folded my clothes, but my mind operated with razor-sharp clarity. Tyler was rushing me out because he had a timeline of his own. With the trust fund officially unlocked, he no longer needed to keep the biometric key alive. He was preparing to sedate little Leo, pack him into his car, and dispose of the evidence permanently. I zipped the heavy suitcase shut. Tyler immediately stepped forward, grabbing the handle and pulling it out. "Let us go," he commanded. "I have a car waiting for you at the curb." He marched down the hallway. I followed him to the front door, dragging my feet. I stepped out into the blinding, oppressive heat of the Arizona afternoon. A sleek black car was idling in the driveway. Tyler turned to me, offering a stiff, insincere embrace. He patted my back twice, leaning close to my ear. "Enjoy the sunshine, old man," he whispered coldly. "Do not call me. I will handle everything from here." I pulled away, looking at him with defeated, watery eyes. "Goodbye, Tyler," I said softly. I climbed into the back seat of the black car. Tyler slammed the heavy door shut, stepping back onto the manicured lawn. The driver shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb. I looked through the tinted rear window, watching Tyler stand in the driveway. He was smiling broadly. He was finally alone. He thought the game was entirely over. The black car drove smoothly down the residential street, the air conditioning blasting against my face. I waited exactly 2 minutes, watching the familiar houses roll past the window. Once we were completely out of sight from my property, my trembling stopped. I leaned forward, tapping the plastic partition. "Excuse me," I said, my voice completely steady. The driver glanced at me. "Yes, sir," I replied, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a thick envelope. It contained 5 crisp $100 bills. "I do not want to go to the airport. I want you to pull over right now, take this cash, and drop me off at the corner. It is 2 streets over." The driver looked at the money, his eyes widening. He hesitated, but the cash was persuasive. He nodded and pulled the car over. I grabbed my suitcase, handed him the envelope, and stepped out. The car drove away. I abandoned the suitcase in the dirt. I walked briskly down the alleyway that ran behind the properties. I approached my house from the rear, staying low beneath the cameras. I reached the heavy cellar doors leading down into the old basement. Tyler never used the basement. I pulled out an old brass key. I inserted it into the padlock. The lock clicked open. I pulled the heavy wooden door upward, slipping into the dark space below my house. I pulled the door shut above me. I was back inside. The arrogant wolf was entirely blinded by his own toxic greed, completely unaware the final trap was already set. The cool, damp air of the old cellar washed over my face. I stood perfectly still in the absolute darkness, allowing my eyes to adjust. This basement was a labyrinth of concrete pillars and thick copper pipes. Dust motes danced in the thin slivers of light, piercing through the small ventilation grills near the ceiling. I had to move with absolute precision and devastating speed. Above my head, separated only by wooden floorboards and drywall, my adoptive son was putting his horrific endgame into motion. I knew exactly what Tyler was doing up there. I had seen the medical invoices for the heavy sedatives. He was in his spotless bathroom, drawing clear liquid into a plastic syringe. He was preparing to put my young grandson to sleep, pack his small, fragile body into a heavy duffel bag, and erase his existence forever. Every second felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I navigated the cluttered basement, silently stepping carefully over forgotten boxes and garden hoses until I reached the far eastern wall. Mounted securely against the cold concrete was the primary electrical distribution panel. It was a massive steel box that controlled the circulatory system of the entire property. When Tyler transformed my home into his digital fortress, he had hired expensive contractors to install a smart grid relay. They had wired the electronic deadbolts, the motion sensors, and the high-definition cameras directly into the main breaker panel, routing power through a wireless hub controlled by his cellular phone. It was a brilliant system for anyone trying to hack it digitally. But Tyler fundamentally misunderstood the physical nature of electricity. Software is merely an illusion painted over copper wires, and I was the veteran engineer who laid those exact wires 30 years ago. I opened the heavy metal door of the breaker box. Rows of black switches and digital relays stared back at me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy pair of wire cutters and a roll of electrical tape. I did not need to hack his software. I just needed to physically sever the nervous system of his security grid. I located the thick blue conduit that fed power to the smart home router hub. I gripped the heavy metal handles of my cutters, positioned the blades around the thick wire, and squeezed hard. The copper snapped with a sharp, definitive click. A faint, high-pitched whining sound from the router box above me died. The digital locks on the front and back doors of the house were stripped of their electronic brains, reverting to standard manual door mechanisms. The state tactical team would not need thermal cutting torches or battering rams to breach the perimeter. They could simply turn the brass doorknobs and walk into the living room. But opening the house was only the first half of my trap. I needed to ensure that Tyler could not escape the attic once he stepped inside that room. What Tyler did not know was that during the early hours of the morning, long before he had knocked on my bedroom door with that poisoned cup of coffee, I had not just been sitting in the dark, weeping. I had crawled back into the stifling ductwork for a third time. I had brought a heavy-duty electromagnetic lock, a device capable of exerting over 1,200 pounds of holding force, and I had bolted it to the exterior steel frame of the hidden attic door. I had carefully spliced the magnetic lock directly into the old, unused electrical wiring circuit that used to power the overhead garage floodlights. Now I just needed to arm that trap. I located the breaker switch labeled for the old garage lighting. I stripped the ends of a heavy gauge jumper wire, bypassing the standard safety fuses, to ensure a massive continuous surge of unregulated electrical current would flow directly up into the attic ceiling. My arthritic fingers moved with the practiced mechanical speed of my youth, twisting the raw copper strands and securing them tightly to the primary terminal block inside the box. The trap was set and primed to fire. All that remained was the perfect timing. If I activated the heavy magnetic lock right now, Tyler would hear the loud metallic slam before he crossed the threshold, and he would realize he was caught. I had to wait until he was completely inside the soundproof padded room. I had to let the arrogant wolf step fully into the iron cage before I dropped the steel gate. I stood completely still in the dark basement, my right hand hovering just an inch over the master bypass switch I had just created. The silence of the large house above me was absolutely profound and heavy. I closed my eyes tightly, focusing all of my acute attention on the wooden floorboards directly above my head. I tracked his movements through the faint, muffled vibrations traveling down the structural support pillars. I heard the soft, distinct sound of his heavy leather shoes walking out of the master bathroom suite. He had the syringe ready in his hand. He was moving confidently down the main hallway. He paused momentarily. I heard the familiar metallic screech of the folding wooden attic stairs being pulled down from the ceiling hatch above the corridor. The heavy metal springs groaned under the sudden tension. Tyler began to climb the steps. One single heavy footstep, 2 footsteps, 3 footsteps. The ceiling floorboards directly above me creaked loudly as his full weight shifted off the wooden ladder and onto the exposed floor joists of the attic space. I tracked his exact path as he walked slowly across the pink fiberglass insulation, moving steadily toward the false wall of cardboard boxes. I heard the heavy brass keys jangling loudly in his hand as he unlocked his massive commercial deadbolts one by one. The heavy steel door slowly groaned open. Tyler confidently stepped inside the dark attic room. Tyler confidently stepped inside the dark attic room. The heavy floorboards directly above my head ceased their groaning, confirming he had fully crossed the steel threshold and entered the soundproof padded cell. I stood frozen in the damp chill of the old basement, my hand hovering over the exposed copper wires of the master bypass switch I had just constructed. My breathing was shallow and completely silent. Through the thick structural pillars of the house, I could hear the faint, muffled sounds of his movements. He was walking toward the dirty mattress where my innocent grandson lay sleeping. I pictured the plastic syringe filled with clear, lethal liquid securely gripped in his hand. Tyler thought he had executed the perfect crime. He believed he had successfully manipulated the local police, outsmarted a senile old man, and legally secured a $12 million empire. He thought he was walking in to quietly erase the final piece of evidence, entirely unaware that he was actually walking into a carefully engineered steel tomb. The sheer weight of what I was about to do settled heavily upon my shoulders. For 24 years, I had treated this monster like my own flesh and blood. I had given him my name, my home, and my unconditional love. But the man standing in that attic was not a son. He was a ruthless parasite who had fed on my family, destroyed my daughter, and caged my grandson. The time for sorrow had completely passed. The time for absolute unforgiving justice had finally arrived. I tightened my grip around the heavy plastic handle of the breaker switch. I did not hesitate. I did not offer a silent prayer for his soul. I simply pushed the heavy switch upward with all the strength remaining in my right arm. The heavy metal breaker snapped into place with a sharp, violent crack that echoed through the entire basement. Instantly, a massive surge of unregulated electrical current rushed through the thick copper conduit I had jury-rigged. The raw power raced up through the walls of the house, bypassing the disabled smart home grid, and shot directly into the ceiling of the second floor. A fraction of a second later, the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my entire life thundered through the structure. It was a deafening metallic clack. The heavy-duty electromagnetic lock I had secretly bolted to the exterior steel frame of the hidden attic door instantly engaged. 1,200 pounds of unrelenting magnetic force violently seized the heavy steel door, pulling it tightly against the reinforced frame with a sickening thud. The physical impact was so incredibly powerful that a fine layer of dust rained down onto my face from the ceiling joists directly above. The trap had successfully snapped shut. Tyler was officially sealed inside his own impenetrable prison. For a few long, agonizing seconds, the house was plunged into an eerie, suffocating silence. Tyler was standing inside a hermetically sealed military-grade acoustic chamber. The thick gray foam lining the walls, floor, and ceiling was designed to absorb every single sound wave, preventing any noise from escaping into the main house. But the heavy steel door itself was not completely insulated from the inside. I stood perfectly still, my eyes locked onto the ceiling, waiting for the inevitable realization to strike him. It started as a dull, muffled thud. He must have turned around and realized the heavy door had violently swung shut behind him. Then the frantic metallic rattling began. I could hear the desperate, rapid clicking of the interior door handle being aggressively twisted back and forth. Tyler was trying to open the door, fully expecting it to swing outward as it always did. When the 1,200 pounds of solid magnetic force refused to yield a single millimeter, the rattling quickly escalated into heavy, panicked pounding. He was slamming his fists against the cold steel, throwing his entire body weight against the immovable barrier. The muffled impacts vibrated down through the wooden framework of the house, a frantic rhythm of absolute terror. The arrogant, composed corporate investor had completely vanished. The sociopathic mastermind who had casually signed away my life just an hour ago was now experiencing the exact same suffocating dark terror he had forced upon a 7-year-old child for 4 agonizing years. He had built an inescapable vault to hide his darkest secret, and now he was permanently entombed within it. I stepped away from the main electrical panel, my heart pounding with a cold, ruthless satisfaction. I wiped the dust from my face and walked purposefully toward the center of the basement. Sitting on a sturdy wooden shelf, covered by a thin layer of grime, was the main control unit for the old residential intercom system. I had installed the wired communication network decades ago, when my daughter was just a little girl, connecting speakers to every bedroom, hallway, and utility space in the large house, including a small speaker box mounted just outside the attic hatch. Tyler had never bothered to remove the analog system when he upgraded the house to digital, dismissing it as obsolete junk. I reached out and flipped the main power toggle on the dusty control box. The small green indicator light flickered to life. I picked up the heavy black plastic microphone, my thumb resting gently against the transmission button. I took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the cold anger to fill my lungs. I pressed the button. A sharp electronic hiss instantly echoed through the silent house. The ancient speakers mounted in the ceilings crackled to life, breaking the tense quiet with a loud burst of static. I brought the microphone directly to my lips, staring up at the concrete ceiling of the basement, ready to deliver a message that would shatter his world. The moment of truth had finally come, and the steel trap was secure. Tyler was listening, and now it was my turn to speak. "Tyler," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the vintage ceiling speakers mounted inside that soundproof prison. "I know you can hear me. The acoustic foam blocks your voice, but not my intercom. You thought you could lock an innocent child inside a dark box for 4 years, and no one would ever discover your secret." The frantic pounding against the heavy steel door came to a sudden dead stop. Hearing my voice steady and devoid of senile confusion froze his blood. He was trapped, and the frail old man held the key. Tyler began screaming. Even through the floorboards I heard his desperate pitch. "Dad, please open this door," he begged, playing the victim. "It is not what you think. I can explain everything." When I did not respond, the begging morphed into vicious rage. "Open the door, you crazy old fool. I will destroy you. I have the money now. I have the trust fund. You have absolutely nothing. You are going to rot in a mental asylum for this." I pressed the transmission button again. "Wood beams can hold 500 pounds per square foot, Tyler," I said. "But they cannot support the immense weight of your lies. There is no server farm. There is only a terrified little boy whose mother you lied about. You stole my grandson. You stole my life. And you did it all for paper money you will never spend. The $12 million you thought you secured this morning was nothing but bait, and you swallowed it whole." His utter defeat hit him like a physical blow. The pounding resumed, no longer rhythmic. It was the panicked thrashing of a trapped animal, realizing the butcher was walking down the hallway. Then the world above me absolutely exploded. The heavy silence was violently shattered by the simultaneous detonation of multiple breaching charges. The deafening sound of heavy glass shattering echoed from the front living room, rear patio, and side kitchen windows at the exact same moment. 4 specialized state tactical units, entirely bypassing the disabled electronic perimeter, breached the house with terrifying synchronized precision. I stood in the basement, listening to the heavy thud of combat boots hitting the hardwood floors. The tactical operators moved with lethal efficiency, sweeping the first floor in seconds. Voices barked clear, authoritative commands, securing the perimeter and ensuring there were no accomplices. I walked to the wooden basement stairs and climbed up to the main level, pushing the cellar door open. The house was swarming with men in dark tactical gear, heavily armed, and moving with absolute purpose. At the center of the living room stood William, dressed in full tactical armor. He gave a sharp nod. "The perimeter is secure," Architect William said, his voice completely calm amidst the adrenaline-fueled environment. "Where is the target?" "He is in the attic," I replied, pointing toward the main hallway. "I sealed the magnetic lock. He cannot get out, but you need heavy equipment to breach that reinforced steel door." William signaled to a specialized breaching team waiting near the entrance. 3 heavily armored officers rushed forward carrying a portable thermal cutting torch. We moved down the hallway and climbed the wooden stairs up into the sweltering heat of the attic. The tactical lights attached to their rifles cut through the dusty darkness, illuminating the false cardboard wall Tyler used as a facade. The officers quickly tore the boxes away, exposing the heavy steel door and the massive commercial deadbolts backed by 1,200 pounds of electromagnetic force. Through the thick steel, we heard Tyler sobbing and screaming, begging for someone to let him out. The lead breacher stepped forward, igniting the thermal cutting torch. A blindingly bright blue flame erupted from the nozzle, casting harsh shadows against the wooden roof joists. He applied the intense heat directly to the heavy steel hinges, connecting the door to the reinforced frame. The metal hissed and sparked violently, glowing cherry red, before melting away under the extreme temperature. It took less than 3 minutes to completely compromise the structural integrity of the solid steel barrier. William stepped back, raising his hand to signal the entry team. He looked at me, his eyes filled with grim determination. "Cut the power to the magnet, Rick," he ordered. I reached over to the exposed wiring block I routed near the access hatch and forcefully pulled the copper jumper free. The loud, distinctive metallic clack echoed through the attic as the 1,200 pounds of holding force instantly vanished. The heavy steel door was suddenly free. "Go, go, go," William shouted. 2 tactical officers stepped forward and violently kicked the heavy steel door inward. It crashed against the acoustic foam padding with a dull thud. The officers flooded into the tiny cell, weapons raised and ready. Tyler was standing near the center of the room, holding the plastic syringe like a pathetic weapon. He was completely blinded by the sudden influx of tactical flashlights and paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming force of the assault. "Drop the weapon. Get on the ground right now." A tactical operator screamed, his voice booming with absolute authority. Tyler hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes wide with absolute terror. That hesitation was his final mistake. An officer lunged forward, grabbing Tyler by his expensive linen shirt and violently hurling him downward. Tyler hit the foam-covered floor with a breathless grunt. The plastic syringe skittered harmlessly away into the dark corner. Before Tyler could even attempt to push himself back up, a heavy combat boot was planted firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him securely against the floorboards. Tyler gasped for air, his face smashed against the acoustic foam, his hands restrained behind his back. He looked up, his eyes darting frantically around the room, locking onto the armed men standing over him. A bright red laser sight from a tactical rifle pierced the dusty air, resting steady right in the center of his chest. The tactical operator kept his laser sight steady on my adoptive son. Tyler stopped struggling entirely. He lay flat against the dark acoustic foam, his heavy breathing, the only sound breaking the tense silence of the small room. 2 state officers grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back. Heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly shut. They hauled him to his feet. His expensive shirt was ruined, covered in sweat. His handsome face was contorted into a mask of pure terror. William stood to the side, stone cold, and began reciting the Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent," William declared, each word striking Tyler like a physical blow. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Tyler tried to speak, his voice cracking horribly. He tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, but one of the officers gave him a sharp shove forward, forcing him toward the open steel doorway. They dragged him out of the ruined vault, past the fake server racks, and toward the wooden access ladder. Tyler stumbled awkwardly as the officers forced him down the narrow wooden steps into the sweltering heat of the main hallway. I was standing directly at the bottom of the staircase, my posture completely straight, my hands steady, waiting for him. The frail, confused old man he had so eagerly manipulated was completely gone, replaced entirely by the furious engineer who had successfully dismantled his entire life. When Tyler reached the hardwood floor, he locked eyes with me. There was no anger left in his gaze, only a desperate, hollow pleading. He opened his mouth to beg for mercy, but I did not give him the chance to speak a single word. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents he had so eagerly watched me sign just a few hours earlier. The documents that officially liquidated my $12 million estate. I stepped forward and violently slapped the heavy stack of paper directly against his chest. Tyler flinched as the sharp edge struck him. "I promised you my entire estate." "Tyler," I said, my voice dropping to a low, incredibly dangerous whisper that cut through the noise of the crowded house. "I used it to buy the prison cell you will rot in." The documents fluttered to the floor, scattering across the polished wood. Tyler stared down at the meaningless papers, the absolute finality of his total defeat finally crashing over his sociopathic mind. He had traded his soul for a fortune he would never touch. The tactical officers jerked him forward, dragging his humiliated form out of my house and into the blinding sunlight, throwing him into the back of an armored state vehicle. I turned my attention away from the front door and looked back up the wooden staircase. A team of specialized tactical paramedics had entered the attic. For a few agonizing minutes, the hallway was completely silent. Then, a paramedic slowly descended the ladder, walking backward with extreme caution. Cradled safely in his strong arms was a small, fragile figure wrapped in a thick thermal blanket. It was little Leo, my grandson. A second medic walked closely beside them, carefully holding the portable pediatric oxygen concentrator, ensuring the clear plastic tubing remained securely attached to his small face. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, the medic gently lowered Leo to his feet. The boy looked incredibly small and utterly terrified by the sudden noise and the heavy presence of the armed men. He squinted painfully, raising a thin, shaking hand to shield his eyes from the natural daylight streaming through the shattered living room windows. He had been locked in absolute darkness and artificial light for 4 long years. The bright space was a massive sensory overload for his exhausted mind. I dropped heavily to my knees on the hardwood floor, completely ignoring the sharp pain shooting through my arthritic joints. I stayed perfectly still, not wanting to frighten him any further. I simply looked at him, my vision blurring with fresh, hot tears. Leo slowly lowered his hand from his eyes. He looked at the shattered windows, the tactical officers, and finally his gaze settled directly onto my face. He studied my wrinkled features, his wide eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of fear and profound confusion. For a long moment, he did not move. Then his tiny, trembling fingers reached slowly beneath the folds of the thermal blanket. He pulled out a small, incredibly crumpled piece of paper. It was a dirty, faded photograph. I recognized it instantly. It was a picture of me holding his mother when she was just a little girl. He had kept it hidden in that dark box for 4 years. He looked at the photograph, and then he looked back up at me. A small gasp escaped his lips. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice incredibly raspy. I opened my arms. Leo took a hesitant step forward, and then he practically collapsed into my embrace. I wrapped my arms securely around his tiny body, holding him tightly against my chest. I wept openly, thanking every star in the universe that he was finally safe. "I am here, Leo," I sobbed. "You are never going back to the dark." In the long healing weeks that followed, Tyler was indicted on multiple federal charges. His expensive corporate lawyers could do absolutely nothing to save him. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his natural life inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. As for me, I reclaimed the $12 million trust fund, dedicating every single penny to my brave grandson. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. And greed. Greed just digs your grave. Did you think my revenge was too harsh? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you are listening from today. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel for more.